Hi, welcome to Last Week in Local for the week ending November 25th. This is our sort of pre-Thanksgiving extravaganza. And I took some advice from Mary Bowling, and I'm going to be out of pocket on vacation, riding a bike for the next two and a half weeks. So I won't be here next week or the week after. So
Oh, I'm jealous.
I'm not. No, I am. Really, I am. I would love to go to Thailand. I just don't want to ride a bike there.
I'm looking forward to it. I get to meet up with my kids who have been traveling around Europe together. My 25 and 27-year-old children have been traveling together across Europe, and they're flying out to Bangkok to meet up with us. So it should be a good time all around. And it's my son's 25th birthday, so we'll be eating lunch in a special restaurant on the 30th of November. So anyways.
Monkey brains.
Well, who knows? I will give it a shot. It's an interesting article in the Washington Post last week about malls are dying or are spending millions to reinvent themselves. As of mid-November, retailers have announced 10,600 store closings in the coming next period of time. That compares to 5,400 stores that closed in 2018. Obviously, many of these are in malls. Some of them are just being pruned. Even the healthy, chains are pruning stores from these unhealthy malls. And as a result, they expect that 1 out of 4 malls will be closed by 2022. So you're seeing the end of the mall as we know it. A few very large, very, lifestyle-oriented malls are successful. But I think for many small towns, it's going to rejigger retail once again in the coming 10 years. I don't know exactly how, but I think there's both opportunity and danger. If you're in a mall, you need to be looking at the mall traffic carefully. And if you're not in a mall, you need to be figuring out, whether you're physically in a good spot to weather and take advantage of the change. One of my favorite companies, right up there with Uber, and is DoorDash. And in D.C. this last week, the Attorney General of District of Columbia filed a lawsuit considering their tipping practices, which we've reported on here, as deceptive trade practices. As you remember, they were taking the tip that you all were giving to who you thought were the DoorDash drivers, and they were including it in their basic minimum wage number instead of giving it to these drivers as a tip. And the Attorney General went on to note that any reasonable consumer would have expected that the tip they added to the delivery charge through DoorDash would be provided to the person driving on top of the payment promised by DoorDash. But as we know, it wasn't. So they finally caught up with them.
Yeah, and any reasonable delivery driver would expect the same thing, that they would get to keep the tips.
Yes. Well, it points out, too, that why you probably, even in restaurants, I as much as possible, tip in cash, even if charging, because who knows how the owner is handling the tips.
Well,
and I really want to give it.
Just ran into that. She was waitressing, filling in for somebody. Her net sales for the days she worked was like 3 times everybody, or gross sales was 3 times everybody else for that whole week. But because she only worked 2 days instead of the whole week, they figured the percent of your pooled tips on how many hours you worked, not how much sales you did. And so she got the fewest amount of tips for the most gross sales. She told that place, she was like, I will not be back, thank you. It was ridiculous.
So Jet.com, who we've talked about before, I think Walmart paid $3 billion and change. It basically was Walmart's effort to move upstream with online services. They attempted to do a food delivery service in New York City, but there were a number of problems in the Bronx. Apparently the warehouse wasn't heated, so workers had to wear really warm clothes. Apparently they didn't have bananas and cantaloupe and iceberg lettuce on hand very often. And ultimately they lost $20 on every order. It's needless to say, this project has shut down. That being said, I think fresh delivery is a special beast, very difficult because it requires excellence at both the delivery side as well as the logistics, planning, and warehousing side. And with fresh food, I think that's really hard. But meanwhile, Walmart is being very successful with their curbside delivery of groceries, which Carrie has noted that even in her small town is now available, and it's available in Olean and Bradford of all places. And that makes more sense because you're already out and about. You just don't want to spend an hour walking around a grocery store. You place your order online, you go in, pick it up. Works pretty well. And Walmart's expanding that program. So interestingly that the delivery is so hard, whereas curbside pickup seems to be working.
Well, and I think they're probably getting quite a lot of pressure from services that are doing it well, like Instacart, who we have Instacart here. And I don't have to go to City Market, which is Kroger, and pick up my groceries. I could have them delivered to my house for like $10, which is totally worth it if I'm not already out and about running errands. I've used it a few times. And I think, because Instacart goes with stores that are already established and you know what products you're buying and you know what they have, there's an advantage there over going with something like Jet, where it's like their own products in their own warehouse and people aren't really familiar with it. The buy-in probably is a lot harder when they're competing with somebody like Instacart who delivers from the stores you already have in your area. That's speculation, but it seems like it makes sense to me.
So in sort of back to the future news, we reported it, a couple of weeks ago that Zagat had been once again inquired by a website called The Infatuation. The Infatuation is a review site in New York City and London that is attempting to curate their own reviews around restaurants, sort of back to the idea of curated as opposed to user-generated content. And what they're doing is they're bringing out a 2020 40th anniversary Zagat guide to where Zagat got started, New York City. So it's just sort of an interesting twist. I think in a place like New York and perhaps London, a book would really work well. It doesn't scale across the whole world, but I think it would work well in large urban environments. And so it's an interesting experiment. We'll see how it goes.
As volatile as restaurants are, though, how much they open and close and turn over, it seems like it's kind of risky, right? Like your example, Olean is tiny, but the restaurant that you help out is like the third brand in the same space in just a few years. I think that's not captive to small town. I'm sure that happens in New York a lot as well.
Yeah, but a book it's not like a map where you're driving there. You're looking it up in a book, you're calling for a reservation, you're double checking. It's basically a reference, right? And so as such, you're looking for an experience, and I don't see it as being high risk to the user if somebody goes out of business. And I don't know. I mean, you're probably right. 10 or 15% do go out towards the end of the year, but that it's a declining. It's of declining use over the course of the year. But I think it would still be a valuable resource. I mean, if I'm going to New York City, I don't know the neighborhoods. I don't know, which restaurants. I don't totally trust Google to make that decision. I don't totally trust Yelp. I mean, a book would be a great way to plan the trip, right? So I see it working really well in tourist markets as opposed to places where people are just looking for a new place to eat that already live there.
So is this information going to be available online as well?
I don't know. I'm not sure. That's a good question.
Personally, I would never buy a book if I could look it all up online in a searchable fashion.
Yeah. Well, it's true.
It might be commemorative, too. It might be like, it is kind of a commemorative. So is it a keepsake? Is it a coffee table book that is interesting to look at? Like, who knows what it's going to be? Maybe it has value beyond, hey, these are the restaurants in this neighborhood kind of thing.
So along those lines, in terms of it being a retrospective, it is returning to Zagat's 30-point rating system, which is interesting. It also has an introduction by Danny Myers. Mary's laughing because Marissa Meyer tried to implement that in Google across every business, and it was not very popular. Although I would point out that in the restaurant business, it's really needed because, for example, the kind of restaurant I prefer, it's sort of physically a dive, but has great food. So it's hard to capture that kind of nuance as opposed, to somebody else who might prefer, a $3 restaurant that has great ambiance. So it's kind of hard to capture that in a 5-star system. Google has dealt with it now with their places labels, but even so, it's not as granular as a 30 point rating system. So in restaurants, I think it makes sense. It'll be interesting to see how the book does. We know the problems in user-generated content reviews. Mm-hmm. I don't know if this will solve those. It'll provide an alternative view of reality. This other next link came to me from Jason Brown. Thank you, Jason. North Carolina Walmart blacklists a customer for too many negative reviews. Speaking about Walmart curbside delivery, this woman who really loves curbside delivery was just trying to make consistent, persistent, perhaps too often, suggestions for them to improve the service. And finally, the store manager thought, they're never going to make this person happy. They discontinued her login and account. Seems a bit extreme, but
it seems crazy when everyone's asking for feedback, and then when you get it, you say, "Sit down and shut up."
Well, and where did the edict to shut that account down come from? Was that from like on high that was like, what the hell's going on? Stop it. And instead of fixing the problem, the store manager just said, oh, we'll just shut it off and it'll go away. Right?
No, it'll just move to other places. Now she's probably doing it on Google or Yelp.
Well, and that goes to educating. Like if you live in that kind of enterprise environment, you need to educate how to handle those reviews from the top of the chain all the way down out to the individual locations and the people who deal with it at those locations. And they don't do that. They're not educating the people on how to manage that.
Yeah, I would guess this started locally, but now that it's made ABC 7 News, probably the higher ups now know about it. Brandify just released a survey that looks at consumer habits in local search. The link, it's basically, you can download it, it's free, you have to give them your email address. There were some interesting questions. I was trying to ferret out the methodology because, for example, which tools do you use to find information about your business? 77% use Google Maps. Well, what does that mean? Is that Google search? Is it Google Maps? Is it local search? It's not. That's from a technical point of view. From a consumer point of view, maybe it makes sense. I don't know. 38% said Facebook. 35% said Yelp. You could do multiples, right? So you could answer Google Maps and Yelp. I think that's probably broadly accurate. Business website 32. Google Assistant Home, 19%. I have trouble believing that 20% of all adults are looking for local businesses with Google Home, but maybe they are. Although Apple Maps was 18%. Interestingly, I went back and looked at Barbara's KPI distribution for driving directions, click-to-calls, and messaging across the ecosystem. And I'm now seeing Apple Maps at 5% in that mix, which is significantly more than when we did this research 2 or 3 years ago. Although we can't tell with Apple Maps whether they're using the browser, Google Maps, or Apple Maps, or we can't tell with Apple which app they're actually using. I am seeing a number of KPIs coming through the iPhone, which means that it probably is mostly Google and Google Maps, but who knows? And then what types of businesses they looked up. So there were some interesting, I think, learnings here. 84% looked up restaurants, 52% retail stores, 33% doctors, 31% grocery stores, 29% gas stations, 25% movie theaters. So it's an interesting list as they go down. What types of businesses are more likely to benefit from having a strong presence. And then they asked when looking up information, what 3 items you find most important. The singular most important thing was hours of operation. Obviously, this speaks to why it needs to be right wherever somebody's going to find you, but on your website as well. Next was basic information like address and phone number, and then reviews from consumers, and the business links to the business website was next. So it just points out why that information also has to be on your website, why your website has to look as good as your Google listing.
Well, and maybe even not buried on your website. How many websites put the hours of operation on the about or the contact page? Put it at the top of your home page. Put it at the top of every page.
And when that scales down to mobile, make those big clickable icons, right? Don't leave them as little non-clickable things on a web page, which I see all too often. Even when they do put them at the top and you scale it down to a mobile screen, those things should scale up, not scale down, and be iconic with big thumb clickable options, right?
Yep.
Absolutely. This was an interesting article. We've been talking a lot about how, and we did a deep dive, I think last week on images, 2 weeks ago, it came up, I can't quite remember, on some of the new techniques that Google is using with images. This is articles from Bing, but it would appear to me that they're using much the same technology. This article is multi-granularity matching for Bing, fancy word for saying that oftentimes AI machine learning can't always recognize the subtler elements in an image, and that as a result, they will look at the context of the image, the text around the image, and create entity vectors between that text and the image so that they can create more granular responses to image search queries. And so I just thought it was, if you're interested in, I see images, particularly as we've been seeing with Google in local search, in the thumbnails on mobile, in the new search by photos, all of these areas where Google is changing these images out based on user queries. I see images as a real strong play going forward. Beyond just eye candy, beyond just looking good, images are now being used to inform Google and Bing about what you do and where you do it and details about that. So I see images as a really strong play. And I think this, for somebody who's technically oriented, so I thought it was a fascinating article. This is a presentation at SlideShare by Izzy Smith, the SEO manager at 6T, and it came to me via Claire Carlisle of England. It was a great presentation, awesomeness near me. It's basically a great deck on the basics of local and the operational issues with local, but from an enterprise point of view where you don't frequently hear sort of how to operationalize the basic steps of local. And I just thought she did a really good job with this. So if you at all have multiple locations, more than 5 or 10, even if you don't, I thought the presentation was well worth taking a look at. This tweet came to me by Gali. You're gonna have to say his last name for me, Carrie.
Guy Sakalakis.
Guy Sakalakis, thank you. My apologies, Guy.
Sakalakis. Sakalakis. Keys is the end. Keys.
Our sincere apologies. We've known you for years and we still can't say your name. We're sorry.
I can say your first name.
We'll
just say Guy, and he's so famous.
Everybody will know.
Know. Everybody knows who we're talking about, like Prince.
That could be a new meme. I will have to suggest that to Claire. She's into memes. This was on social media, blogging, lawyers, forming human relationships from Tech Law Crossroads. I just thought it was a very good, we've talked over the past 6 months about how really, and Carrie has pointed this out, that her husband functions, or she functions on behalf of her husband in community groups. And the goal of that is to make real connections with real people. And this lawyer points out that the reason to have a social media presence at all and to network is to create opportunities for real meetings, to form human relationships. And I think when you keep that in mind, then it's about answering questions or engaging people to answer your questions more than it is about you or your ego. And he sort of detailed his sort of path from starting with LinkedIn to going to Twitter to then going to Facebook to then blogging and how he's tying those together. But equally important was he raised some interesting research from Clio that I'd read about but hadn't looked at carefully, where they noted that 57% of consumers use online research to find a lawyer. But what I thought was really interesting about it was what they wanted to know about lawyers. 77% wanted to know a lawyer's experience, credentials. 72% wanted to know what types of cases the lawyer handled. He notes that sometimes lawyers make this sort of unduly complicated, that what consumers want to know is relatively simple. 81% wanted their lawyers to be responsive, big surprise. 80% wanted their lawyers to tell them how to proceed. 76 wanted to know how much the matter will cost. 74% want lawyers to tell them what the process will be. And I thought from this research should largely inform both your website content in terms of keeping it simple and answering these questions. And I thought also it provided a great outline for Google Q&A questions that you should be thinking about asking and answering on your business profile. So with that, over to you, Mary.
Okay, so Google has upgraded CallJoy, which is one of its incubator projects. So Google owns, or Alphabet owns, CallJoy.
Yeah, interestingly, it's run as an independent company. It's one of Google's first SaaS type products.
Right.
But I just noticed a couple weeks ago it's being highly promoted in the GMB dashboard now.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, local SEOs keep pushing call tracking, and Google's trying to find a way to satisfy that, compete with the call tracking companies. But now they're also touting CallJoy as a virtual agent that you can train, a virtual phone answering agent that you can train for your business. And one of the arguments they use for using something like this is that their research has shown nearly half of calls to local businesses go unanswered. So we had a long discussion, way too long discussion about this in our pre-talk. But you know, the question here is, do you want to use a virtual agent? What kind of things can you use a virtual agent for? Which kind of things that are just going to make people angry and frustrated? And Greg Sterling also wrote an article on his take on what the uses for this is. But basically, you train AI to answer your phone for you and direct the calls to where they want to be. Personally, I get totally frustrated with call trees, and if I've gone through the trouble of looking you up, getting your phone number, and calling you, I would actually like to speak with someone. So for most businesses, I would not recommend something like this, but I know that Mike and Carrie have other ideas on it.
Yeah, for me, I think if it's implemented intelligently, then it makes sense. I mean, every call is a potential customer touch point, much like responding reviews. And like you said, Mary, it's a way to establish that first contact and so on. But in some businesses, when you are truly the sole operator and you're not sitting at your desk, you're out in the field, answering phone calls could be difficult. I think before implementing it, I think you need to take a really rigorous system approach. You should listen to your phone calls, answer every one for 90 days, and assess them. Which ones are, vendors trying to sell you, $4.99 Google My Business deals? Which ones are truly, potential customers or customers needing work? Understand them, categorize them, and try to set this up in such a way that it does allow those people that you do want to talk to through. I think there is the danger, like you said, Mary, of putting them into call phone hell, and I think that wants to be you want to avoid that at all costs. But I think there is a possibility. And Carrie, I know you talked about it in terms of single practitioner type businesses.
Right, like my husband usually doesn't answer calls during the day because he's on a ladder and he's painting and he can't climb down and pick up his phone every time somebody calls him. So I can see using it to answer very simple questions. I suggested maybe using the questions that you're using for all of your Q&A opportunities to train your AI. I also think that if you already have a call tree, if you've deemed it necessary for your business, this is a way better way to do it if you can train it correctly, because the person that's calling does not have to wait through your press 1 for this, press 9 for this, all the way through the menu to find the right one. They can just ask a question, and somebody who sounds like a real person actually says, yeah, I can connect you to that, or yeah, here's our hours. Hope we see you soon, kind of message, where you actually feel like you're talking to a person instead of listening to a recording. So I think there's use case for it for sure, but I don't think it should take the place of, you know, selling things or doing your business. But if my husband doesn't have to pick up the phone every time some robocaller calls him. In fact, I think it would be funny if you could train it for like robocalls to like Rickroll them or something. I think that would be hilarious. My RoboKiller app does that. Whenever like the spammers call, they just play Rick Astley songs for him. But I think, you know, I think there's
I don't know who Rick is, and I don't know what Rick rolling is. Sorry to be totally out of tune, but
Google it and click on it. Everything you see, click on it, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. Anyway, I think there's opportunity.
I'm going on vacation tomorrow afternoon.
It'll work in Thailand. It'll still work there.
Summary version of this.
It's basically a video that it's like Never Gonna Give You Up song, and like people think they're clicking on something useful, but it's not useful at all. Kind of thing. That's Rickrolling. Anyway, I think it could be this whole AI as your phone tree thing could be really good because people actually feel like they're talking to a person versus a recording. I think Mike's right. It needs to be done very well and intuitively so people don't feel like they're in the loop that they can't get out of, or if they say, you know, you can train it over trigger words like emergency or, you know, a manager or operator. It goes right to somebody right away, but I think there's a lot of opportunity in it.
Yeah, just as a note, it uses the same duplex technology that Google is using in their restaurant reservation system. The other is, you know, like a form on your website. This is one of these things that you want to test yourself, call yourself, see how it handles it, have your wife and children, cousins, uncles, and current customers call you and see how it handles it to make sure that if you do choose to do it, that it does behave properly under real world conditions.
Because if you've set it up and you've trained it, you get how it works. You need to have people who don't get it use it.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
And periodically check it because your business could change. Maybe you forgot to update it. I know with forms, you know, a lot of times forms just stop working on the internet and somebody's got to be checking them. Otherwise, these form fills are going into the ether, and it could happen with this as well. Not that Google ever sticks anything in the ether, right?
Employee turnover could trigger new training. If somebody calls, hey, can I talk to Carol? I'm sorry, Carol doesn't work here anymore. Who you need to talk to is Lisa. Let me transfer you, kind of thing. You know, there's that as well.
And I could see this becoming a useful service that agencies could offer in place of some of the things that are dying, like building citations every month. Hint, hint.
I would say dead, Mary, not dying. But the question I have about CallJoy, is it worth $39 a month to your husband, Carrie?
At this point, no. Yeah, no. At this point, no. If he decides to scale his business back up to multiple crews again, he's two guys in a ladder right now. So, not right now, but if and when he does decide to scale his business up, it might be worth it, depending upon the volume he's dealing with. Right now, he's managing just fine, having people leave a message, and he calls them back at lunch or after work. But if the volume of calls increases much more, he would need some kind of screening solution. And that's, I mean, $39 a month, it sounds like a lot. He would pay it to not have to deal with it, I think, at that point.
Well, and then you'd have to add agency fees for setting all this and training it and checking it on top of that. But for certain businesses, I think it could be a good service to offer. Then on search engine land, there's an article about Google search results as eye candy. And it shows some eye tracking studies, how users are navigating the search features and all the different ways that we're seeing the SERPs these days. And basically, it's like pinball. I mean, that Google's testing all the time. We're reacting, and different people are reacting differently all the time. But as Mike said in the pre-talk, the upshot of this is that you've got to be aware of what your search results look like and make sure that your information is complete and correct in all the places that Google's going to show people online. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, Bright Local did a Google Analytics, a study of Google Analytics data from 11,000 small business websites. And they tried to make some benchmarks for different types of industries that you can see in their study. But the startling thing about this is that it shows that there's no traffic from email and no traffic from paid search. And this is probably, we hope this is not true. We hope this is just a indication that people are not setting Google Analytics up to work with these things properly. If it is true, I think it's time to start slapping some of your customers around and proving to them that they may need some paid advertising at certain times, and that email can have really good ROI if you do it properly.
Now, I would think, MailChimp, for example, provides very good analytics and focused dashboard. You can see both open rates and click-through rates and which articles. So we don't, as an example, work to integrate it with our analytics. So I think it's a failing of the of what they were looking at, not a failing in general, although I think email use is still on the low side, given its low cost and its high return.
Agreed. And over to you, Carrie.
Awesome. There was an interesting article on CNN about Uber piloting a program to record rides. And I wasn't real clear on whether it was audio or video or a mixture of both. But it sort of seemed to me like, okay, this might be a solution for all of the creep-tastically awful things that happen in an Uber. And why haven't they done it from the beginning was the second thing. Mary pointed out that's probably because, distributing the technology at scale was probably not in the cards. Although it could be a phone app, right? Or something like that. That's how Uber drivers get all their, everything gets run through an app. So, but you're recorded when you get on the bus, you're recorded when you get on a train. Why not when you get in a taxi or a rideshare? I just think it's a kind of a no-brainer. I thought it was an interesting new safety feature. I guess it's audio recording, but still, why not, right? There was an article about a cafe chain in India called Chayo's that I guess is famous for their chai tea. And they're testing using facial recognition to bill their customers. So when you go in and you buy something, scans your face, recognizes you, and then charges your account or something somehow. It kind of creeps me out. It just seems like a little over the top. But then it got me thinking, like, is this how transactions are going to work in the future? We're already getting there with the Amazon cashierless store, right? So, if they can recognize the phone in my pocket and my account, why couldn't they use my face to connect me to an account as well? I don't know.
Nobody could steal your face. They could steal your phone.
Right?
Yeah, well, who would want to steal this? Although, as I noted in the pre-talk, I was listening to NPR over the weekend, and they noted that facial recognition fails significantly more, to the point of almost random chance, on people of color and women, because most of these algorithms were trained by men with obviously a bias, white men with an obvious bias towards white men in the sample. So as you pointed out, it's probably not just anybody's facial recognition. There's probably some sort of your face being logged in and become a member, but still, it would open up questions Maybe in India, maybe they don't recognize white men. Maybe I could get in and out without paying.
Let us know how
Possibly.
that goes in Bangkok.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Claire Carlisle of Claire Carlisle Marketing updated her local SEO resources master list, which is a big list of blogs and podcasts and SlideShare accounts and Twitter accounts of all the people that contribute to the local SEO community. I really like the links to the SlideShare accounts because I like to kind of look at people's new presentations when they post them. So it's a really great resource to kind of have in your hip pocket when you're looking for information.
So just to note, she gave me grief last week because I couldn't think how to describe her, and I called her a quote unquote rock star, and she gave me grief about that. So I will rephrase that, Claire, and I will call you a thoughtful, hardworking, willing to share local SEO. Hopefully that's better. Yes. And my apologies.
One of the funniest people I know. Claire
Although
Carlisle.
she relies a little too heavily on these animated GIFs. It's like, all right.
Nope, she doesn't. She's really good at it.
I'm just giving her grief. That's all. She deserves it.
What I have to say about it is that took a lot of work, Claire. Thank you for doing that for all of us.
I agree. Hardworking and sharing. Those are my new descriptors.
Awesome.
All right.
Joy posted this morning that they're still seeing a lot of flux from the Bedlam update. Rankings going up and down. I don't watch very closely on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. I tend to look at month views. But I have noticed just in looking that there's lots of pogo sticking going on where one of my clients will be number 2 and then number 99 plus and then number 3 and then 90 again. And I think that whatever they're doing, they haven't quit fiddling with the dials at this point. I'm not sure we've even figured out what's leading to this much flux. Like there's not this is what they're doing, this is how to stop the flux kind of, because it's not over yet. We don't know. So it's sort of still wait and see at this point, I think, how that shakes out.
Yeah. I'm sure there's some joke in here about what's leading to the flux is Google's inability to control the flux capacitor or some other such dial.
Yes.
I mean, we just ended 43 days of Google Q&A coming and going and coming and going and coming and going. We think we've ended it. It's been 3 days with the numbers returned to more or less to normal. So it's not clear, but it's like cool.
So maybe all of this ranking bullshit is them trying to fix the Q&A. That sucks.
Or maybe, or vice versa, right? Who knows?
That would suck. Guy, who has a last name we don't even need to use anymore, wrote a really great article over at Attorney Sync about local service ads for lawyers. And right now it's very beta. I think Mike pointed out you can only use it in San Diego. Is that what you said? San Diego?
That was the last I knew. It was San Diego and maybe one other city.
Yeah, and only for estate planning lawyers and immigration lawyers. But like I said, that's a test. I do think that it's going to roll out to a lot more verticals. And he's, making the case for why you should be aware of it and on top of it. I think that if you went to any SEO and asked them what's the most aggressive category in marketing, they'd probably tell you lawyers. So if you're not looking at it, your competitor probably is. So I think, he makes some really good points about why you need to pay close attention and be ready when it is available in your niche and location. And then lastly, Mary and I got to do the Found Bites podcast with David Mim over at Thrive Hive. We talked a whole bunch about service area businesses and tactics for ranking when sometimes maybe maps is not an option. A lot of times with service area businesses, most of the time. If you market service area businesses or you are a service area businesses without a brick and mortar in every single town you service, head over there, have a listen. We'd love to hear your feedback or your tips that maybe we didn't mention. I would love to know what other tactics people are using for service area businesses. That's it.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us for this pre-Thanksgiving extravaganza. I won't be joining you next week, but I think Carrie and Mary and Colin will be here, as I understand it. So join us again next week. Thank you for joining us this week, and we hope you have a great Thanksgiving. Take care.
Happy Thanksgiving,
thanks.
everybody.